Hello, good afternoon. So here I would like to share my provocation, but before we jump into it, I would like to just briefly introduce myself. So I'm a designer for research and imagine alternative urbanism. I am interested in how people live in the city, how they interact with organic or inorganic objects, and how we will be able to solve the urban problems through design. I'm currently studying industrial design at KAIST, and on tackling the urban problems, I try to utilize design, science, and technology as a tool. So all of my thoughts, project, and provocation started from this single question: how can we live good in this approach of Anthropocene? We're living in an Anthropocene where humans as a prominent force is changing the natural ecosystem, geological features, and even the climates. On the planet where no place is free from the influences of urbanization, the city is a core place where all of these transformations are made. So depending on what kind of social, economic, and environmental fabrics they create, the entire planet and all creatures living in it are affected by these kind of turbulence. So let's think about the present. Are we living in a good way? So we are witnessing the ecological crisis, climate change, economic crisis, jobless, and the dissatisfaction on our lives. So all of these are quite of symptoms that indicates that the current model of designing the city is failing. We need to change, but in order to change, we need a new design framework and methodology. So let me just emphasize again about why it matters, why the way how we interpret the city is important. So on tackling the problems derived from complexity, it is always important to grasp the system. Depending on how you see it, the actual outcome of analysis and design will vary. So it's pretty much same when you think about the old story of the blind man and the elephant. If you see as a circle, the outcome would be something like circle. If you see as a triangle, the outcome would be triangle. Since the conventional methodologies on designing the city mainly focuses on the human developers especially, the current practices are destined to only focus on about the humans and neglect the others. Nature is one of the neglected ones. So nature has long been depoliticized, often functionally exploited as a resource of instrument. At this moment, with the imperatives on the ecological crisis, we need to reestablish the relationship with the nature. Nature not as just an entity to be protected or at best be accounted for, but as an interactive interlocutors. So how will we be able to benefit from each other, and how could we symbiosis? But prior to that question, how should we understand this city? So this is my topic of my provocation, the blueprint of holobiont urban design. So for the 4 days of research, I mainly focused on these two themes, urban ecosystem map and the multi-species ethnography. And with the help of amazing faculties and the fellows, I was able to get a hint of how we should map the urban ecosystem to interpret the complex system like city, and how we could do design ethnography on multi-species in order to understand the living organisms living in the city. So above all, I'd like to first introduce of an urban system. So first we have to think about what exactly is living in the city. I label them as actors. Any living organisms inhabiting the city like human, pigeon, bee, and tree could be the actors. And then we think about the environment surrounding them. Environment could be any artificial or natural elements consisting the city. But the thing is that the environment itself is very much complex, so I sorted them into 3 layers. So the first layer is about the nature, literally the natural environment that existed long before human has created the city. It could be a topography or landscape, for example, mountains and rivers. It could be climate or weather like rain. And the second layer is about the human, the artificial environment that we have constructed by our own taste. It could be built infrastructure, architecture like buildings, or all transportations like bus, car, and metro system. The last layer is about the codes, the service, industry, manufacturing process, policy, regulations, and finally the behaviors of our human. Then going back to the actors, there would be like multiple actors surrounding this system. Then we should think about what kind of interactions are made between them. So the interactions are mostly consist of inputs and outputs between these elements. It could be between actors and actors, or actors and environments, and environments and environments. And the inputs and outputs could be material, space, water, air, soil, or energy. And based on these kind of interactions, we will be able to think about the intimacy between these elements. Intimacy, which is shown as a distance between these elements, is an index that articulates the likelihood for them to share the space in peace. So let's think about the human and the lion. It's pretty obvious that we're going to be a prey for the lion, right? Then we could say that we humans and lions have a low intimacy of the life. And in terms of thinking about humans and dogs, we have a long history of symbiosis, and we could say that we have a high level of intimacy. But intimacy is not the concept that only applies between the actors. All actors have own intimacy between the environment, and each environment would have own intimacy among them. Then the whole urban ecosystem map would look like this. So 3 wavy surfaces of environments and actors constantly moving through these surfaces and constantly keep connecting and disconnecting or reconnecting with the others. So if you carefully examine this collection of connected interactions, you spot a certain tendency of direction or form of a cycle. I call them as a flow. It's about how the resources like water, air, soil, or energy flows, or about how material or spatial relationships are connected. And if you more carefully examine these flows, we will be able to find a missing link on these flows. So one of the goals of this holobiont urban design is to reconnect this link, or if there is an unsustainable link in an existing cycle, we could replace the link. And I think this is how design should intervene on urban problems. So one of the strongest points of this urban ecosystem map is that we can scale either down or scale up. Sorry. So the city is not only about the space, but also who lives within it. In terms of inducing a certain social or urban change, ethnography could be used to lower the transaction cost, making the new change seem familiar. So in addition, ethnography also helps to discover the potential needs and tendencies of the subject. However, as most of the design ethnography methodologies cannot be applied to the multi-species as they are human-centered, an interdisciplinary effort is needed in order to develop a new methodology targeting the non-human species. So the diagram here illustrates the possible cooperation of each field. So think about the interactions, the actors. Depending on what kind of behavior or spatial context you're in, the intimacy would be different. I wish I could show you the concrete example of the system map and the multi-ethnography, but I'm still working on developing the framework and methodology. So, however, in the future, I am actually planning to continue the actual analysis and design targeting on a specific site in Seoul. So I'm looking for people to collaborate with, and any questions, feedbacks, and comments are welcomed. So thanks for listening.